Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prairies of Jackson County. My name is Tony Vorwald. I forgot to record the actual Zoom webinar of this, so I'm going to record it now and send it out to everyone who requested it. All right, let me share my screen and we will get going. All right, the Prairies of Jackson County. So a little bit about me before we get started. My name is Tony Vorwald. I'm a naturalist for Jackson County Conservation. And what I do is mostly environmental education stuff, natural resources education, outdoor rec education. But I also get to play around a little bit with some habitat and conservation work and projects as well. All right, so today we're talking about the prairies of Jackson County, Iowa. And the prairies that we find here in Iowa are considered tall grass prairies. So looking at this picture I have on the screen, this would be a picture of a part of a tall grass prairie. And the tall grass prairie is an ecosystem that's found in the Midwest United States, from Indiana to about a third way through Nebraska, from Canada all the way down to Texas. All right. So it's an assemblage of different plants and animals that make up a prairie ecosystem. And here is a map that kind of shows you the range and extent of the prairie ecosystems that are found here in the United States. So this green color, there's three different colors here going on. This green color is where the tall grass prairie ecosystem is found, mainly. The yellow is considered mixed grass prairie, so we have a little bit of a transition going on there. And the orange is considered short grass prairie. So this is kind of a map of the ecoregions of these prairies and where they can exist or historically existed. But here is a map of the state of Iowa, and this is a native vegetation map, and this is based off the vegetation ground cover of the state in the 1830s through 50s, kind of that settlement time of the state. So a few different colors going on here. We have green, yellow, blue. The green represents some sort of forest system along the state. You can see in the eastern part of the state and along a lot of the rivers is where we find most of our forests here in Iowa. The blue is water, so rivers, lakes, wetlands, things like that. And all that yellow you see, that is prairie. That's where the tall grass prairie originally was found in the state. So Iowa is about, or naturally about 85% tall grass prairie at the time of European contact. So Iowa is about 35.7 million acres. And originally, kind of at the time of the 1830s, 28.6 million acres of it was tall grass prairie. And one thing that people found out, that the European descended people found out pretty quick, is that where there is prairie ground, it makes for really good soil. So Iowa obviously is an agricultural state, has some of the best soils on earth, and a lot of that is due to the organic matter and the deep soil that the prairie created over generations and generations. So now in Iowa we have about 30.6 million acres of some sort of agricultural system. So where all that prairie was pretty much now is agriculture. So like I said, Iowa was about 85% prairie. Now it's less than 1% prairie. Here's kind of an outdated map, but it kind of illustrates that point. That top is that 1850s land cover map. You have that kind of beige color represents prairie, the green, woodlands, purple, wetlands, blue, you can't really see it on here, but it's water. And then the very bottom here, this is a 1990s land cover map of Iowa. And same colors hold true, but they added a few new ones in there, and gray being row crop. So you can kind of see where all the majority of the prairie was in the state is now some sort of row crop agricultural system. All right, so kind of a few more terms to define. We have a remnant prairie versus a prairie restoration. So a remnant prairie is a prairie that is relatively undisturbed or unchanged from that time of, that European contact or European takeover in the 1830s, right? So the picture down here on the left, this is a picture I have of a remnant prairie. Remnant prairies, usually less disturbed, may have a little bit of disturbance, was never plowed, maybe it was not grazed or only relatively lightly grazed compared to other spots, has a assemblage of native plants. Usually the diversity is a lot higher in a remnant prairie than a prairie restoration. And this picture on the right is a picture of a young prairie restoration. So maybe not quite as diverse, different assemblage of plants, but still a good conservation effort all the same. So kind of back to that definition of a prairie remnant. It refers to a grassland in the western and midwestern United States and in Canada that remained to some extent undisturbed by European settlement, like I said. So down here on the right, this is a picture of a little prairie remnant, oak savanna remnant that we have out at Ozark Wildlife Area that I'll be talking about a little bit later. And prairie restoration, to kind of define that a little bit better, is a conservation effort to restore prairie land. So pretty simple. You take a pretty simple definition. I mean, take a plot of land that was once prairie, no longer prairie, then seed it down in native flowers and grasses to recreate and restore a prairie ecosystem. So the picture you see down at the bottom here is the picture I took out at Mines of Spain State Recreation Area, just south of Dubuque. And you see a lot of different colorful flowers here. This purple, that's wild bergamot. The yellow looks to be yellow coneflower. And this is kind of a good representation of what a prairie restoration looks like. You know, some prairie restorations can be really diverse and well managed, and some not quite so much. You know, so they might be a little bit more grass heavy, or it all kind of depends on how it was seeded and how it was and how it's been managed. Here is a few more pictures that I've taken at some prairie restorations on county conservation property. Up here, up in the left, this is up at Whitewater Canyon, Dubuque County Conservation property there. You see some wild white indigo out there. I see some grasses and, you know, maybe not as forb heavy as some other prairies. Down the bottom here is at the Hertzville Interpretive Center, where I'm currently at. That's where my office is. And a nice June prairie here, these purple flowers, that spiderwort. And then up on the top right, this is probably an early July picture at the same prairie, actually, a little bit other flowers going on. This big tall green one right in front and center, that's rattlesnake master. I see these purple pale cone flowers in here, some black-eyed Susans, things like that. But when it comes to prairie, there's kind of a handbag of management that prairies need to have. So a prairie naturally has disturbances that help keep it a prairie. So a lot of it being fire, also grazing by large herd animals. Historically, that would have been bison and elk to some extent. And then maybe also having it be a little bit more dry conditions, right? The wetter it is, the more readily trees can grow. So when it comes to prairie management for a remnant prairie or a restored prairie, we definitely use fire, prescribed fire as a management tool. That prairie grasses, prairie flowers, prairie plants, they've been adapted to withstand fire. They have deep fibrous root systems that fire does not, you know, usually damage, and those plants can come back up after a fire goes through. A fire kind of goes through and takes out old growth dead plants. It also can help combat woody species and invasive species. That ash kind of puts some more nutrients back into the soil. And there's some plants that really need some sort of fire to break down its seed coat and germinate the seed. Another prairie management tool that we use is mowing. Mowing kind of replicates grazing if you don't have active grazing on your prairie. Some people do use livestock or even bison in some places to kind of graze their prairie restoration, right? But mowing is definitely a good tool for that. You use it a lot when you have a big patch of unwanted species in your prairie. Maybe it's some cool season invasive like reed canary grass, but also you get a lot of use it a lot with a young prairie restoration, the first few years after seeding of a prairie restoration. There definitely has to be some woody species and invasive species control and removal. If you have a prairie, eventually trees are going to grow or shrubs are going to grow. Birds bring in seeds, wind brings in seeds, other animals bring in seeds on its fur. It just kind of happens. Or if your prairie is adjacent to a woodland, things just start creeping in the natural order of things. But also invasive species. An invasive species, a plant or animal that's not native to an area that got brought to that area for some reason other, on purpose or by accident, and that species kind of escaped cultivation or escaped control and starts causing ecological problems, like outcompeting native species, really running rampant, things like that. We had to try to combat those things either by physically removing them, hand tools, saws, so on and so forth. It takes a lot of work, takes a lot of effort. You can work all day physically removing woody and invasive species from a prairie, and then maybe not even get a drop in the bucket done for the work that has to be done out there. And then we also employ the use of chemicals from time to time. I know not everyone is a big fan of using chemicals on wild habitat. I'm not either, but it's kind of a necessary tool, especially when you're dealing with large scale habitat projects. It's close to impossible to have a small crew of people to go out and get out every single invasive species that you need to get out, right? Seeding is also an important management tool. So if you're establishing a new prairie, that putting down that initial seed bank there, or if you have a established prairie restoration that you want to kind of increase the diversity in it, you can do a little interseeding, getting some new species seeds contacted into the soil to try to increase the diversity there. And then monitoring. Any prairie that's managed needs to be monitored, because you can do a ton of work on a prairie and get it in really good shape, and then in a few years, things are going to creep up. Invasive species, woody species, diversity might shift in different directions. So you definitely need to keep monitoring that prairie, these prairies, so future management can be discussed and acted on. So I'm going to show a little video of a remnant prairie that we did some work on last spring and last March, I believe, or it might have been early April 2020, something in there. But we did some physical removal of woody plants from this prairie. We've done more work since this day. So some of these trees that you might see up here are no longer there, which is a good thing for this prairie. And you'll hear the chainsaw running and kind of see some of the work that we did. And what we did was on this day was we cleared the southern exposure of this prairie. And I'll talk about it a little bit more, but the prairie remnants that we have here in Jackson County are usually pretty steep and have a southern or southwest sun exposure. And that sun exposure kind of keeps more sun on it, keeps it drier conditions, less hospitable to trees, keeps that system more of a prairie. But eventually trees do grow, and so we kind of got rid of some of the woody species within this prairie, and then this little tiny patch of prairie, and we opened up its southern exposure so it gets more sun, because prairie plants are very, very sun loving. Back up a little bit. No, never mind. At the very end of that video, you could see that that edge of there's a big bluff there, and then we kind of cut all the trees that we could get at without, being in danger to fall off the edge or anything, but cut off those trees so that sun gets directly contacted to the prairie. Here we go. The next kind of management tool I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth is prescribed fire. Like I said, prairies have been adapted to deal with fire. The prairie is a fire-dependent ecosystem. Fire more or less naturally has to be a part of the prairie to keep it a prairie, right? All these species are fire-dependent. These species really can thrive after fire goes through its system. So here is a prairie restoration out at my dad's farm. And the left here is a picture of a prescribed burn that we did last spring. It's a pretty young prairie, so it's only about 5 years of growth. This is the first burn that we did on it. And the picture on the right is a picture that I took when I was deer hunting this last early winter. And it's kind of hard to see it because it all looks kind of like brown grass right now. But after this first burn, the prairie had a lot less weedy annual plants that we didn't want in there, non-native plants, and the diversity and the richness of native species definitely increased after this first burn. This prairie is pretty young yet. If you're looking at it, you can see a lot of native grasses, a lot of C4 grasses there, but hopefully this prairie's diversity increases over time. I'm going to show you another video of a prescribed burn. This is not one that we did. This is one done out in Timber Hill Prairie, and the video was done by Isaac Snow of Snow Media. It is just really well done, and it really illustrates what a prescribed burn looks like. And though it's not one that was done in Jackson County, this is a great example of what a prescribed burn looks like and should look like, right? Very cool. So that was a great visual of what a prescribed burn looks like with all that awesome dramatic music in the background. That crew looked very well equipped and very well planned and managed there. So um, it's not quite as simple as just letting a match and walking away. There's a lot that goes into it. So next, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the prairies that Jackson County Conservation manages. If you want to kind of check out some of these prairies, pretty much the majority of our wildlife areas, recreation areas, wildlife preserves have some sort of prairie restoration done to them, at least the vast majority. So if you want to go to jacksoncct.com and look up our different parks, pretty much anything that has wildlife area, natural area, conservation area, recreation area is going to have a prairie restoration on it, right? But what I really want to talk about is some of the remnant prairies that we have in Jackson County. So we only have a few kind of small little patches of remnant prairie. And once again, remnant prairie is a prairie that was never plowed up and destroyed. It's been around since prairies have been around. You know, it was never plowed up by the settlers from one reason or another, mostly because it's either on a really steep slope or a rocky slope or a combination of both. Like I said, most of Iowa was kind of plowed up for agriculture, easily tillable, but some of these little spots aren't. So the very first one I'm going to talk about is the one at Buzzard Ridge Wildlife Area. Here's a picture of it down here. I think I took this in early September or late August. It's one of the best views in the state, in my opinion. And this one is actually fairly easily accessible if you're into a little bit of a hike. So you can hike out to the overlook there at Buzzard Ridge, and you'll be right on that little goat prairie, that remnant prairie, sorry, that overlooks the Maquoketa River here. So here are a couple images, some aerial images. The one on the left is an aerial image from 2019 that I snagged off the internet. And right here, this little open spot, that is our little remnant prairie. The picture on the right, this is the oldest known aerial photo of the area from the 1930s. And that same spot is kind of right here. And then it's kind of hard to tell with this picture and this picture, but it drops off pretty steeply down to the kind of like a bottomland situation. So obviously in the 1930s, this was a lot more open, whether it be because it was a little bit more a prairie system or there was a kind of the aftermath of the initial timber harvest of the area during European settlement, right? But it would have been more open naturally anyway, a little bit more of a prairie and savanna system than a full woodland system. But if you look the picture on the left, you can really see how a forest can grow in 90 years, right? All these little blotches here are trees, but you can tell what the trees are here. So I'm a huge fan of woodlands, obviously, but you can kind of, this really illustrates how a woodland can, or woody species can take over a prairie system if it doesn't have those disturbances, that grazing, that burning. Here's another picture of that remnant prairie I took this October, early October. The colors were fantastic. The picture here on the left is a picture I took of it from the river. I was kayaking down, and right up here, that is where that prairie is. Here's a picture of myself and my director out there working last spring, clearing out the western and southern facing exposure to get more sunlight on the prairie, removing some trees and woody species. All right, so what I want to talk about now is a few really cool species that we found out at these prairies. So with these remnant prairies last year, and I'm going to continue this into the future, but going out and kind of doing some floristic surveys of these prairies, going out and trying to figure out what plants are there, because these remnant prairies, like I said, are a little bit more diverse, or can be a lot more diverse than prairie restoration, right? And sometimes these species are pretty rare compared to what you might find in a prairie restoration. A little bit, lot more diverse, right? So I'm going to share with you 3 species for each of the 3 prairies that I'm going to be talking about. And I'm not really going to go over some of the common prairie species like big blue stem and purple coneflower and stuff like that. I just kind of want to share with you some of the little bit more stuff you don't see quite every day. The very first one, this is called blue-eyed grass, and you see the picture of it here on the right. Blue-eyed grass is a mid-spring, early summer bloom. I kind of consider it a spring prairie flower. It likes dry and upland prairies, so perfect for the prairie at Buzzard Ridge. Kind of a short one, but only about 1 foot tall. This is growing early on the season. It's not competing with the really, really tall prairie plants. It has this nice light blue, purplish flower, and has really grass-like leaves. So down here in the middle, here is a kind of a habitat range map where this plant is found in the United States. The dark green means it is found in that state or that province. And then the light green is where that plant is documented. These range maps are a great starting point, but always kind of take them with a grain of salt. Sometimes there are places where it says the plant is not found that you either know what it is or you could assume it might be based on where it is surrounding. Like I see a little northern Iowa county that it says it's not in, but it's every county around it has it. So I would say it probably has it or had it at one time, but take it with a grain of salt. The next is purple milkweed. So most of us are familiar with milkweed, and we plant it a lot for monarchs and monarch butterflies and other pollinators. You might be familiar with common milkweed, butterfly milkweed, swamp milkweed, and so on. About 12 different milkweed species that are native to our state of Iowa. And this one is one of my favorites because it's one that you see, but not around everywhere. This is called purple milkweed. And this one is kind of considered the oak savanna milkweed. It has purple flowers clustered at the end, top of the plant there. It's kind of a late spring through midsummer bloom. It gets about 3 feet tall, like those reddish purplish flower clusters. It has opposite leaves. The leaves are pretty oval shaped, about 8 inches long by 4 inches wide. And looking down here, you kind of see where its range is. The mid sort of tallgrass prairie ecosystems kind of going through the eastern woodlands there, where there would be some open woodland situations. The last one I'm going to talk about for this prairie is called stiff gentian. This is a late summer fall bloom. It likes rich limestone prairies. It's about a foot tall. It has several purple upright flowers clustered to the tips of its branches. And you can see on the picture I have here, illustrating that. Um, that's the leaves are stalkless, so the leaves are coming right out of the main stem of the plant. And this one is a biennial. So a lot of our prairie plants we think of are perennials. They come back year after year. But this one is a biennial, which means the seed germinates. The growing season there's a herbaceous, there's a like a non-flowering plant, and then the next year after that it flowers, drops seed, and dies. Right. And looking down here, you can kind of see its range through the eastern half of the United States, east northern half, sort of, kind of into Appalachia too. Interesting. All right, this next prairie is probably our smallest little patch of remnant prairies that I'm going to be talking about, but one of the coolest ones because it has some of the more rare species that we've been finding on our remnant prairies. So this one is called Black Hawk Wildlife. This one's at Black Hawk Wildlife Area. And here's a picture that I took sometime early last summer, I would say. But more work has been done to this prairie since, so it's a little bit more open than what you're seeing in this photo. And on the right here are some photos that we took early last spring when we went out and did our initial work of 2020 out on this prairie. Here once again is our aerial photos. The one on the left is the historic aerial photo from the 1930s. And here's that prairie right here. And here it is. You can kind of see that little opening spot. I wonder what these aerial maps would look like updated, if you could tell where we kind of did some tree thinning and cutting. So a cool species that I found on the majority of these prairies, but also on this one, is one that we might be familiar with. It's called hoary puccoon. This is like a spring bloom, a spring prairie plant. It likes masic and dry prairies. So what masic means the soil's not too wet, not too dry, or upland savannas as well. About 15 inches tall. The leaves and the stalk are dark green and they're hairy. So that's what hoary means. Kind of means hairy. There's little hairs all over the plant. The leaves are about 2.5 inches long, and its flowers, as you can tell on this plant, especially in this picture, they're yellowish orange flowers cluster at the end, at the tops of the plant. They're not super tall plants because early in the season they're not competing with some of the taller prairie species that come along later in the summer. The flowers are pretty small themselves, and the individual flowers are about 1/2 of an inch wide. Here we go looking at its range map. It looks like it's kind of found in the majority of the tall grass prairie ecosystem, not quite down to the southern reaches of it, but pretty extent through the entire region. Another really cool plant that I found out there is called cylindrical blazing star. So we might be familiar with different types of blazing stars in the prairie or that we use for landscaping, like prairie blazing star, meadow blazing star, those big, long spike flowers that have all the little tiny purple flowers all over it. This belongs to the same genus, but the flowers aren't quite as showy and robust as like a meadow blazing star, though they are very showy and beautiful. This is a midsummer, early fall bloom. You find it on dry, sandy, rocky limestone prairie. So perfect for this one. It's about 2 feet tall. It's a smooth plant. It's unbranched and has grass-like leaves. Those thin grass-like leaves help it retain water to lessen water evaporation out of it because it's found in that dry, hot prairie, right? The leaves can be about 10 inches long, but only about 1/2 an inch wide. So it shows you how long and skinny those leaves are. And its purple cylindrical flowers are found in the upper parts of the stem, alternately up the very upper points of the stem there. We have the picture of the up close flower here. I did not take this photo because the photos I took of it weren't that good of detail. So I snagged a different photo, but you can kind of see the cylindrical nature of these flowers, the individual little flowers in these clusters here. So that's a little flower, that's a flower, that's a flower. It's not one flower, it's multiple clustered. Looking down at the bottom here, you can kind of see where it falls in the tallgrass prairie region, sort of mid and eastern part of the tallgrass prairie ecosystem, and not it doesn't go too far south. It doesn't get into Texas and some of those southern parts of the tallgrass prairie. Another really cool one that we found here is silky aster. So we might be familiar with other asters like New England aster or sky blue aster. This one is a summer fall bloom, like most asters are. Likes dry prairies, limestone-rich prairies. This one is a branching plant. Only gets about 2.5 feet tall. Has alternate leaves that are about an inch to about an inch long, half an inch wide, and it's covered in dense, silky hair. But if you look at it, you can see the hair on it. But you touch it, it does feel silky, giving it its common name. Um, and it has numerous purple flowers clustered at the top of the stems. This plant kind of tends to fall over and lay down a little bit, since it kind of a lot of times it's found on some of those drier prairie sites. It isn't always surrounded and supported by other plants, so it kind of falls over on its own weight or pushed over by wind or something like that. And down here is our range map found kind of in the all throughout the tallgrass prairie. It's kind of interesting how there's a big break here, but you can see it down here in Texas and stuff. But it says it's not quite as abundant in Oklahoma and northeast Texas and whatnot. And the last prairie I'm going to talk about is at Ozark Wildlife Area. So Ozark Wildlife Area is my personal favorite Jackson County conservation property and has my favorite prairies on it. There's a few prairie remnants out at Ozark. It's not all one continuous one. And here's some pictures of my favorite spot at Ozark. I would consider this a little bit more of an oak savanna. So an oak savanna, if I haven't said it before, is an ecosystem that is kind of, think of it as like part prairie, part woodlands. It has prairie species. It has some open grown trees, usually oaks, sometimes hickories, open grown sun loving trees, not a lot of understory. It has prairie species or savanna species, somewhat shade tolerant, but sun loving species falls underneath them. In these pictures, you can see all these orange clustered flowers. That's butterfly milkweed. See a little purple milkweed here, some wild quinine. This is probably our most diverse prairie of our remnant prairies that we have. This picture, I believe, was taken in early July. Here's some more pictures from that exact prairie. This one on the left is a little bit more of the oak savanna part of it. You can see this wide, open grown oaks, but you don't have a lot of other trees in the understory. Not a lot of scrubby, pokey stuff, but mostly like forbs and herbaceous plants. Here on the right, another early July picture. We have our lead plant here, some butterfly milkweed. I see some palmate coreopsis here in the background. Here's another picture of a different prairie out at Ozark. This is the same prairie that I showed you that video clip where we're running chainsaws and stuff. It's that same one. This one's super steep at southern exposure, a lot of spiderwort blooming at this time. This might be a June one, maybe even that early July one. I don't really quite remember, but you can kind of see how steep it is. I took this picture. It's a little bit grainy, but you can see my colleagues as they're walking up the hill and how steep that actually is. So here is the aerial photos of that prairie. So that picture I just showed you, this one falls right here. This is the 2019 image reading. You just kind of see that open sliver. Up here is restored prairie, was once definitely originally prairie, and it has a couple different fingers of prairie and pockets that are kind of found throughout here that don't represent well on the image, but you can tell by the trees, the open grown trees, and some of the prairie and savanna species you found in there, and that it was once prairie, or also that most of the trees that are in there are young, maybe only 30 years old. It kind of depends, but they don't have that old age class there. But here is our 1930s image. And this whole horseshoe here is very steep because here's the North Fork of the Maquoketa River. So here's where this prairie is, right here, and you can kind of see where those other fingers of the prairie ran down to the bluff's edge. And up here is where that restored prairie is now. And even over on here, you can kind of see a little sliver of open prairie habitat along the top of the bluff here. But this whole thing was open back in the 1930s. Pretty interesting. Some cool plants that we found out during our surveys at these prairies. This first one's called Indian paintbrush. It's a spring, early summer bloom. It likes that mesic, dry to sandy prairies, about 2 feet tall. It's unbranched, has hairy stems, has alternate leaves that are kind of greenish yellow. Has a really inconspicuous flower. The flower's hard to see. So up here is my picture all this bright red orange that isn't a flower. That's actually leaves that are found below the flower. The flower is kind of nestled and hidden amongst those leaves. But those leaves are showy and red. So this one's actually an annual, so it's not a perennial. It comes back, it drops seed and dies, and then the next year's plant comes from the seed that was dropped. And this one is actually a partially parasitic plant, so it borrows or takes a little bit of nutrients from surrounding plants that its root system is connected to. So here on at the bottom, we can see its range map. It's found throughout the majority of the tallgrass prairie, even into the eastern, farther east into some of the open woodland and Appalachia areas. This flower is one that I is one of my favorite flowers of all time. This is one that we found out at a lot of the Ozark prairies. This is called large flowered false foxglove, which is kind of a tongue twister. This is a late summer bloom. You find it a lot in oak savannas. And the reason for that is that it's a partially parasitic plant to oaks. There's oaks in the white oak group. So white oaks, bur oaks, maybe swamp white oaks. So it's going to take a little bit of nutrients from those oaks as well. This plant gets up to be about 4.5 feet tall. It's very leafy and branched, and I kept finding this plant before it bloomed, pretty much the entire growing season, but it didn't bloom until August, and it was kind of an ephemeral bloom. The flowers didn't last too long on it before they were kind of withered away, but has really lobed leaves. I don't have any really great pictures of the leaves, but they kind of remind me of oak leaves themselves, very lobed. But something that was really cool about these plants is I'll show you a picture here in a second of how like bushy and robust this plant can get. But when I was out there, when I was in full bloom, I'm not kidding. The flowers were like vibrating with the amount of flies and beetles and bees and pollinating insects that were utilizing that plant as a nectar source. I've never seen movement. You can kind of see right here there's a bee kind of going down into the tube of the flower, and they get in there and like the flowers are moving. It was crazy. Um, you can see those really showy flowers. They'd be about 1.5 to 2 inches long. You can find it in the tallgrass prairie, the eastern tallgrass prairie, even down to the southern tallgrass prairie, if you're looking at this range map here. So here is some pictures of one of our oak savanna sites in early August with all that really robust large flowered false foxglove. And this plant seems to do really well the year after a prairie had some fire go through it, which is kind of cool. The last species I'm going to be talking about, I believe it's the last one, is a really cool one that you find on remnant prairies a lot of the times, and this is called nodding lady's tress. And this is an orchid, so this is a midsummer kind of fall bloom. It's found in a variety of habitats. It can be in like really wet and boggy areas, all the way to well-drained prairies. So it's part of the orchid family. It's a pretty small plant. It's only about 8 inches tall, and it has hairless leaves. But the leaves can be up to 7 inches long, which is kind of cool. And it has a white tube-like stalkless flower in a spiral arrangement. Sometimes there's a little bit of hair kind of going on the upper stem of the plant, but you see how the flowers themselves are arranged in a spiral, and it reminds you of that lady's tress hairstyle, kind of an old-timey hairstyle. But take a look at it, Google it, and you'll be able to see the resemblance between the flower and the hairstyle. This plant has a really strong vanilla odor, so you can smell its aroma from a decent ways away. And I've heard tell of some people who found the plant because they were following their nose, which wasn't the case for me. But I also have allergies, and late August I'm usually pretty plugged up, so maybe that's why I didn't smell it. Very cool. All right. Thank you all very much for joining me today. I'm sorry this isn't the recording of the original program, and we don't have all the great questions that people were asking the other night when the live version of this was out. But if you do have any questions, feel free to email me at tony@jacksonccb.com. I'd be glad to help you out there. Take a look at our website and our Facebook page, the Hurstville Interpretive Center Facebook page, or jacksonccb.com to look at our upcoming events. And hopefully we have some prairie walks and some different programs for the public out at some of these prairies here in the spring and summer. Thank you all very much. I appreciate your time.